Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'm the Compliance Evangelist. I'd like to welcome you to episode 41 of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Tom Fox and Matt Kelly. Matt, of course, is the founder and editor of Radical Compliance, which provides sharp thinking about compliance, audit, and risk. Today, Matt and I visit about the arrest around the intelligence leaks involving Reality Winner and the NSA report on Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. We consider the facts of the leak and the arrest of Ms. Winner, and we take a look at it from the internal controls lesson. It's based on a blog post Matt wrote entitled Intelligence Leaks and Internal Controls, which of course I'll link to in the show notes. But we found some very interesting lessons for the compliance practitioner going forward, particularly around end user controls, access controls, physical and electronic controls and security, audit trails, and controls around third-party vetting. The episode comes in at just around 20 minutes. I think you will find it very interesting. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back with my good friend and colleague, Matt Kelly, founder of Radical Compliance, for another episode of Compliance Into the Weeds, where we take a deep dive into a compliance subject that has intrigued us. And this week, it's current events. So Matt had a great post up today on entitled Intelligence Leaks and Internal Controls, where he looks at an extraordinarily current event and then gives us some compliance lessons. So Matt, why don't you set the table with what was the intelligence leak?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, Tom. So this week's big news, some people might remember this, saw it on Monday. The Justice Department charged a 25-year-old woman whose name is Reality Winner. They charged her with leaking classified intelligence to the media. This is the first time that this Justice Department has actually charged somebody with leaking intelligence to the media as opposed to the foreign government. I will be honest, I do not know if prior administrations have done similar crackdowns against leaking to the news, but this is the first one the Trump administration has done. Yes, I suppose. So what Ms. Winner did was leak intelligence about Russian attempts to hack into local election systems, which leaves me thunderstruck because my local election system looks like it still works on the quill and vacuum tubes. So I don't know how Russia thought they could hack anything. But apparently Russia was trying to hack last fall into local elections. The National Security Administration had generated an intelligence report about this. And lo and behold, Reality Winner, who is a contractor for a company called Pluribus Corporation, Pluribus International. Pluribus provides staffing to various government agencies, including the NSA, where Ms. Winner was an employee for several months, started working there in February, and sometime, according to various court documents, affidavits, and search warrants and whatnot, sometime right around May 9th, Winner printed out a copy of this intelligence report that had been dated May 5th. She printed out a copy on May 9th, mailed it to a media outlet online called The Intercept, which follows national security events quite closely. The Intercept published this, I want to say late last week, June 1st or 2nd or something like that. And within a few days, the NSA and the FBI, who had, the NSA had been asked to comment by The Intercept, please comment on this report that we obtained. They managed to track down, okay, if this is the document, who would have had it? It looks like Ms. Winner. And so the FBI picked her up on Monday and charged her with one count of violating the Espionage Act. And that is the backstory.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg of really where you went into this case, or this matter, I should say, because you really took it from the angle of the compliance officer and lots of internal control lessons. So why don't you start that, and then we can maybe debate a few of these.
Yeah, sure. So I think that what really caught my eye first was that here's how the FBI reverse engineered from The Intercept showing them a copy of a document they got in the mail anonymously within a matter of days, they tracked it down to Reality Winner being the suspect here. So because the document was mailed to The Intercept, when they presented a copy to the NSA for comment, they could see, okay, this is a photocopy image. There's a crease along the top. So therefore, somebody printed this intelligence report out. I don't know, obviously, the details of the NSA's systems, but the NSA could trace who specifically would have printed out this document between May 5th, when it was generated, and I think May 30th, when the Intercept went to the NSA and said, here's the copy, please comment. So they actually could track down that only 6 people had the ability to print this document out, and Reality Winner was one of them. And then they went and did an email search of all 6 employees' computer workstations. They found right away that Reality Winner had communicated from her personal Gmail address on her NSA workstation to the Intercept. So that narrowed it down from 6 potential people to 1 prime suspect. Then the FBI went to interview Reality Winner at her home in Augusta, where they knew the mail received by the Intercept, the envelope had a postmark from Augusta, Georgia. And everything added up, so the FBI went to interview Reality Winner at her home in Georgia, and she confessed that day. And that led to the charges against her. So when you break this down, the importance of end user controls. She was the actual end user. The fact that Reality Winner could print this document out, that is one end user doing something. I'm sure the NSA was not pleased by that, but they did have an ability to trace who printed it. So they had some control, not to thwart her from printing, but to be able to see who did what printing. That was one aspect of it. And this is something that companies struggle with all the time is, you can have your data secured in the cloud and then running on a very well-organized database. But in most applications, you still have this little function somewhere that says, can you, export to Excel and download onto the user's desktop at their workstation. And then they might print it out. They might put it on a thumb drive. They might email it off somewhere. Who knows? But this whole question of end user controls, I thought that was really interesting because that put all of this into motion when an end user tried to evade control. And it brought it all to a close because the NSA did have enough visibility into who was doing what that they could almost immediately go from the thousands and thousands of NSA employees to 6 people, down to 1, down to a confession.
So we've got several different controls you've identified. You spoke at some length about end user controls, but you also talk about, if I could even take a step back to say, just basic physical security controls and who can print documents as opposed to perhaps reading it on a desktop, laptop, or on your computer. So we've got physical and electronic security. But then you've got access controls. Why don't you tell us a little bit about access controls? Because I thought this could lead us into a very interesting discussion.
Well, this is one where, again, from our perspective, and we have limited insight into what was going on here, but something here struck me as not adding up. These intelligence reports were supposedly need-to-know material. How many people needed to know that this report on May 5th talked about Russia trying to hack local election systems? Reality Winner. Reality Winner did have top secret security clearance. So in theory, she could access some intelligence reports that were need to know if she needed to know them. But according to the affidavits that have been filed, she did not need to have she had no reason to read this specific document. I don't know why. We don't know what she was doing for the NSA or what her proper job should have been, but she had enough security clearance to see a class of documents. But even then, allegedly, there should have been another set of controls for each specific document. And when you're the NSA, this kind of exacting level of control, this matters. But she saw something that she did not have a need to know, to read. So how did that happen? We're not clear on that, but that is an access control failure. It's taken to a far higher extreme than most companies would encounter in our normal lives, but most of us aren't dealing with geopolitical intelligence where this would matter. And you would expect that the only people who need to see this are the only ones who have access to it. And that's not what happened here. She saw something she had no business seeing. So that was an access control failure that caught my mind. Your point about physical security, I glossed over that, but I think that is spot on, that when we talk about security controls, as we often do in compliance, it is become shorthand for cybersecurity and controls over the flow of information over internet wires. We need to remember that physical security does matter. Basically, Reality Winner printed out this document. She smuggled it out on her person and went out through the front door. I don't know how we would actually counteract that, short of actually frisking people as they go in and out, which seems a bit invasive to me. But if you're working for the NSA, like, this is the business you've chosen. I do know that in some places, in some data centers, you cannot take phones into the data center. I know some are very restrictive. I know Indian outsourcing firms, for example, that might process accounting data. I have heard stories where they won't let the accounting processors over there go into a room with a notebook, with a pen, with a phone, none of that. You go in with your person and a keyboard that's there to do your stuff, and then you leave. It's a very exacting level of control. I don't know how you might disable the Control P function on a word processing software program. I don't know how you could or could not, and this is something, again, that the NSA probably could have blocked Gmail access for employees and contractors if it wanted. Apparently it did not. That worked in the NSA's favor, actually, because I don't know what Reality Winner was thinking, accessing personal email on a workstation computer. Of course, they'd be able to find that. So they did. There's all sorts of controls here that you can kind of piece out. It's a lot about access. It's a lot about security, and it crosses back and forth between physical access and security and virtual access and security. And we have to remember, total security encompasses both of them.
So you hit on the audit trail, so maybe now we can explore the third-party vetting issue, because I think you raised some very interesting issues there as well.
Well, yeah, this is where you start to want to psychoanalyze Reality Winner a little bit, which we should not do. We have not met her, but according to her social media posts, clearly she was no fan of Donald Trump. She was an Air Force veteran. I know that. I do not know anything beyond that about her political leanings. There are plenty of Republicans who do not like Donald Trump. There are plenty of Democrats and independents who do not like Donald Trump. I don't know who she did like, or whether she had any sort of agenda that she wanted to try and subvert Donald Trump. We've got no evidence of that we know of yet. But this is a major security breach for the NSA, and it looks to me like there could have been some ways to try and catch this, prevent it. But Pluribus International put her on this account. And what vetting did they go through? How did she get a top secret security clearance? There are plenty of Democrats in the country today who do have top security clearance. So I'm not saying that you should rule people in or out based on their partisan leanings, but I don't know how you would square that. I don't know what the vetting is, but they clearly let somebody in who decided to exercise her own judgment in violation of the law and NSA protocols. Now, there's plenty of 25-year-olds in the world who think that they know better than everybody else. I was one when I was 25 too. But we do have to wonder, how would you get around this? And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know that the third-party vetting is a very instructive or informational thread to pull on with this. Because you're always going to wind up having third parties who work on your behalf who betray you somehow. But there's a whole lot on the access controls that is also worth thinking about. That's why I found it such an interesting case.
So I guess really the overriding kind of theme for me, Matt, considering this from the civilian compliance practitioner's perspective was to properly assess your risks of whatever you view as your crown jewels and put in protections for those crown jewels. Now, I recognize with the NSA, you have literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of documents that receive a top secret stamp and or categorization. So it's a different level at a government agency, but in a business, the controls you have articulated, access controls, end user controls, security controls, and indeed even third-party vetting controls, those are all should be well within a compliance practitioner's toolkit. But you're never going to have enough money to put in high level enough controls. So I think really one of the key issues for me, or at least key points you raised in me thinking about this, was what have you assessed your own risk? And I bring that up in a long-winded way of saying I met or interviewed the chief technology officer at Coca-Cola last month. And he said, we have one thing that we have to protect, and everybody knows what it is, no secret, the formula of Coke. If they broke in and stole financial data, would I be upset? Maybe, if it was large enough. If they hacked the entire city of Atlanta, every Coke machine to get financial information, yeah, that might be a pain, but it would not be something that I would really lose sleep over. So that he recognized that not that people are going to necessarily employees are going to steal, but that there are going to be data leaks and there's going to be data security breaches. So you have to really figure out what is the thing that's most significant to your company and put in protection around that. And you've articulated at least 4 or 5 different controls that you can put in place, both prevent and detect controls. And then I don't know what you would call the audit trail because it's beyond detection. It's finding out, being able to trace where information has gone. So any really thoughts about where the civilian compliance practitioner might take any or all of these?
Well, I do think that one point we should explore further as a compliance community is really access controls to electronic data and security controls in the physical world. They're pretty much the same thing. They serve the same purpose. A locked door is an access control here in the real world, and if you don't have the key, you don't get in. And I think that we often talk these days because most compliance officers work at a keyboard most of the time. We think in terms of access control and how important it is, but really, there are so many ways to go basically old school and subvert a lot of these access controls that we need to look at a little bit more. That was the one key thing that jumped out at me the most, is that all she did was print out a document and put it in her purse or her back pocket or on her person somehow and walked out the door. And how can we guard against the flow of information that as it crosses from one medium to another, from being an email thing that you can't email, and there are plenty of ways to block, an email address at theintercept.com or Radical Compliance or FCPA Compliance Report. There's plenty of ways to block it electronically that we can still just go old school. And how would we block that? And you have to walk a fine balancing act. Certainly away from the national security context. If you've got a formula for Coca-Cola that exists somewhere on a PowerPoint drive and only people can see it when they're in the inner sanctum, I could pull out my phone and take a picture of it and walk out the door and shoot the photo up on YouTube. And that would be a disaster for Coke. The CTO is absolutely right. So you need to be thinking through some very difficult problems that I think are only going to get more difficult. When we're 20 years from now, when we have all these iPhone cameras embedded in our eyeballs, I don't know how we're going to stop people from looking at sensitive information, but that kind of thing, that's coming in the future, and we're really going to have to think hard about it. It was just a very interesting case study of how the most sensitive places in the world and the most organizations most attuned to security, they can still be tripped up in some very easy ways. Now, sure, they were very good at sweeping back in. I mean, they completed this investigation in a matter of days, when usually a leak investigation might take months. But once the damage has already been done, okay, that's a great second prize to have. It's still a second prize.
So that's interesting because the control that I thought was the most significant that you pointed out, Matt, was the end user control, not necessarily the access control. Because having worked in the corporate world, I think it's really important that employees have a very wide access to internal corporate documents for at least viewing. But if you put some other type of control beyond the access control, it perhaps gives another level of security. So I've been really thinking about that control and how the compliance officer could use that. But really what you've laid out for us here, I think, are several different levels of controls that I think you're absolutely right. We're not considering, number one. Two, we're not considering how they all interact together. And three, we're certainly not considering 3, 5, 10 years down the road when all of this is going to be on a cell phone, or as you say, in our eyeball, and how it's going to change. So a really interesting wake-up call for those civilians out there who might be listening to this, as opposed to government contractors.
One last thought I do have, and this just popped into my mind, because I did write a bit about the excellent auditability of this information. That's really what helped the NSA, that they could immediately find if this document was printed, only 6 people could print it within that time period. That if they had trained employees or simply told employees what our auditability and audit trail reconstruction abilities are, that might have scared off some people. I don't know if it would have scared off Reality Winner or not, but if she had known that, we're able to figure out exactly who printed out what document when, and then we can cross-check that with your email records, and we'll be able to find you, that might have given her pause. And maybe it is okay for compliance and security people to open the kimono a bit to show employees just how astute your investigatory abilities and your audit abilities are. You're inviting them to think even more creatively about how they might evade your controls. You're somewhat showing them your cards. But if you've got a really, really strong hand of cards, it's worth throwing down 1 or 2 to scare people. That might be something else to consider.
Let me flip that around and take it from the other side, because I think you've really hit on something that I really try to emphasize is what I just heard you say was operationalizing a control, a compliance control, or an IT security control, but operationalizing through the HR department. You have HR train on this. You have HR give that information out during employee onboarding or during routine training on you name the subject. And so that you have a control that you push down into directly to a frontline business in a function that is not IT or compliance. So that really, I think, is a great way to think about how you can operationalize a wide variety of controls and how these controls in many ways are compliance controls, if not data security controls as well.
That's very true. I know the internal control gurus out there would look at this maybe from a COSO framework perspective. Audit trails and tracing people back, that is all about monitoring and control activities, which are 2 big components of the COSO framework. I think you could look at it through another way and say that the control environment that you're trying to set overall, if part of that is showing people just how invasive and scary you can be, and it's the NSA, they're allowed to be invasive and scary in their own premises. This is what they do. That might be a different way to phrase it and get to the same point you were talking about. You can show people this is how strong these other components are. Therefore, you can see how seriously we take this and how strong our control environment is. So don't do it. Now, like I said, maybe that's just going to make them think that much more ingenuitively or ingeniously about how to subvert your controls. It might be a risk to take. We're it's going to depend on your own organization and your risk appetite, but it shouldn't be something to be overlooked. It's one possible strategy.
Well, once again, just a fabulously interesting and thought-provoking blog post. And I hope as more information comes out about Ms. Winner, that we can garner some additional lessons that we can impart to the rest of the compliance community. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate us, as it would help in our rankings. and help get the word out about the only compliance-related podcast that goes deep dive into a topic of interest. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or Matt. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach Matt at mkelly@radicalcompliance.com, and you can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds, and I hope you'll join me again for our next episode next week.